What's up, peeps? Back with another video. So today we're talking about 5 exercises that are not particularly popular and are often vilified that I really like and I've gotten not just enjoyment from, but results from as well. So let's jump right into it. And number 1, we have rack pulls. Now, as everyone knows, I'm a big fan of rack pulls. I think they are excellent. I think they actually get the job done a lot more than people think. Now, whenever I post a picture of my rack pulls or a video of my rack pulls, I actually get a lot of comments like SFR bad SFR, low stimulus, high fatigue, bad SFR bad. And I think this stems from powerlifting, because for powerlifting, I do think that the rack pull, especially higher up, is not going to be particularly valuable. If you look at the sticking point for most people in the deadlift, it is fairly early in the movement. It's a fairly low sticking point. So sometimes right off the floor, sometimes a little bit off the floor, maybe mid-shin, somewhere around there. But people are usually not failing a deadlift around the knees or higher. If they are, usually it's because they got out of position to sacrifice strength later in the movement to get more strength earlier in the movement. This is usually from rounding the back in some place, which, is fine if you're used to that and if you can brace effectively. But that doesn't mean that a rack pull is really going to help your deadlift in most cases. So yes, for a powerlifter, especially if you are very strong, rack pulls are going to have a not great stimulus because it's not very specific to what you're trying to accomplish, and they will have a lot of fatigue as well. However, I tend to do rack pulls for quite high reps, and I don't care about my deadlift. So that's not really a goal. I'm trying to get my back thick and juicy. And if you think about it, what works the back when you are deadlifting? Well, it's this type of action. Where your shoulders are forward, your upper back is rounded, and then you have to bring those shoulders back. So this is actually working the traps because of the weighted stretch, and not just the upper traps, but the lower and the middle traps to get that chest raising action. It's almost like a front squat in some ways. It's going to work the lats quite a bit, more than a lot of people think, because your shoulders are tucked forward and you're trying to keep the bar close. Like that is still lats. It's not a lengthened movement, but it is still absolutely working the lats. And then the spinal erectors, it's fantastic for those because you're not quite isolating them, but you're using them just as much as a normal deadlift, but you're sort of taking the lower body to a certain extent out of it. You're still working the hamstrings and glutes to extend the hips a little bit, but because the movement is almost done when you're starting around the knees, you can really just focus on using the back a lot more proportionately compared to a deadlift. And so I get the sort of, oh, you must be a juicer, look at your traps. Well, a lot of that is from letting my traps and my shoulders, everything, round forward and stretch forward during a deadlift. I'm trying to finish the movement as low as possible. So I'm trying to lock out around my knees if I can. I can't because my arms are pretty long, but not that long. But I'm trying to really lengthen and stretch everything out in the upper back. So if you want a big deadlift, don't do these. If you want big hamstrings, big glutes, don't do these. These are more contraction focused. But for that upper back, it actually is a lengthened focused movement because you're really stretching everything out. And then unlike a row where you're really trying to contract everything, you are actually not quite getting to that fully contracted position. So I would say for upper back, these have been very effective. And so try them out. Number 2, the Arnold press. Now these are often vilified because people will look at the anatomy of the front delt and they will say, oh, this doesn't do anything. So just start here and then just do a normal seated dumbbell overhead press. I get that, and I think if you only wanted to maximize front delt hypertrophy, that would make sense because you're not really getting much of a stretch on the front delt here. You are a little bit, but what I find is that these are great for traps. So another good trap movement because you have to be almost like shrugged down here, and then you're rotating back, which is working a lot of traps. It's working more side delt, I found, as well. And it's okay to choose a movement that is not working a specific muscle or part of the muscle as quote-unquote optimally as something else. You can choose general exercises. You can choose an exercise that is working several different muscle groups pretty good. It's not maybe the best for any particular area, but you can't really have a program that is really digging deep into every single muscle because you'd be doing like 80 exercises, okay? It's fine to choose exercises that are more general and less specific, and I would include the Arnold press in this because you're working, yes, the front delt, but also the side delt, even a little bit of rear delt from this kind of action. People will look at EMG or something like that, but I have found, I've gotten sore rear delts from that, from stabilizing, and it's almost like you're pushing back. On an overhead press, you're pushing up. With these ones, you're rotating, and it's like the sticking point is up here. I know it's I don't give a fuck. But this lockout is very, very challenging, and I have found these to be overall very, very effective. Number 3 are dumbbell pullovers. Now, I really, really like these. I don't do them the same way as natural hypertrophy does. He does them sort of lying across the bench, which might allow you to sort of open up a little bit more and to lean back. But I like to do them on the bench, so where you're lying on the same direction as the bench, you're on the bench, just because I find it to provide a little bit more stability. And I also like to dig my head into the bench as I go back, which also gets a little bit of neck work as well at the same time. Now, some people might say, oh, this is not a lat exercise, it's not working the lats. Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm going to call bullshit on that. People will cite, some biomechanical study or EMG or something. But, if you can feel the lat stretch as you go back, I think it's stretching the lats. People will try to gaslight you. Like, no, you're not feeling the lat. You're feeling the oblique or the rib cage or the serratus or the abs or something else or the rear delt. I know when I'm feeling my lat, okay? Stop. You're not feeling your chest in the bench press, you're feeling your quads. And we are all built a little bit differently. The shoulder joint is a complicated one, so it's possible that some people feel more chest when they're doing this movement. Some people might feel more rear delt, some people might feel more lats, some people might feel more triceps, So there's a lot of different areas that can actually provide shoulder extension from that extremely extended position. And so, yeah, this could be working multiple areas, but again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I've also found these are actually pretty good as a sort of bulletproofing exercise. If you can't do dumbbell pullovers because you feel really unstable in that fully extended position, you should probably do dumbbell pullovers, because these are actually going to be a good movement. Just start light, start controlled. You might want to add a pause in that fully lengthened position. And if you are weak in that area, you're going to want to strengthen that area. And so often when I get a client and they're like, I cannot do this exercise, I'm thinking, I know what we're going to be doing. Not always, sometimes it just doesn't make any sense. But I think often if someone is getting pain from a movement or they just don't feel comfortable with that movement or their range of motion, they should probably be doing that movement. Just building up, starting with lighter weights. And, if your body is so sensitive that it's giving you pain from a pretty basic range of motion, I think nothing super extreme. I think, for your own just durability and injury prevention, you should probably build up that area and that tolerance to stress in those positions. By the way, this video is sponsored by Boostcamp. Now, it doesn't matter how good your exercise variations are or how good your technique is, if you're not actually tracking and measuring and managing your progress over time, you're probably not going to go much of anywhere past the beginner stage. Keeping a training log, absolutely essential. I'm always astonished by how many people, they just don't write anything down. They're like, yeah, I think I did this for 5 reps or 6 reps or 8 reps last week, so let's see how many we get this time. And so Boostcamp allows you to track your progress in the app, and it also gives you access to some of the best programs on the internet. Bald-Omni-Man has a few programs up on there. Alexander Bromley, tons and tons of creators have awesome programs up on there. I have 2 with a 3rd in the works. And so check out Boostcamp. I will leave a link in the description. And thank you again to Boostcamp for sponsoring this video. Next up, we have machine squats. Now, full disclosure, I used to be in the gym like 4, 5, 6 years ago, doing my barbell squats like a fucking small-legged champion over here, and I'd see someone using machine squats, and I'd be like, fucking pussy. Really, like that was actually my mindset. Just like, look at this guy, he's using a machine. I'm over here with my little twigs squatting up a storm with my barbell. And ironically, when I hurt my QL and I couldn't do barbell squats, and I couldn't do barbell deadlifts, and I couldn't do these basic movements, it was the single best year of quad training that I had had since my first year of lifting. In fact, it might have even been better than my first year of lifting. And I made a lot of progress from working in movements that I would never have dreamt of doing before. And so I really do recommend getting injured. Or you can learn from other people's mistakes, right? It's cool how that can work. You don't have to snap your shit up in order to unlock some dope variations. So I actually find that these are a lot more stable. You don't have to worry about, unracking or re-racking or, stabilizing or balance or any of that. And, I have some imbalances in the hips, and these are just way, way, way more productive. Plus, I can keep it much more quad dominant. You actually can see in the videos where my hips are coming off the pad. I get asked about this a lot. It will visualize what would happen if I kept my hips on the pad. So the pad would actually drag my hips down, making it more hip dominant and less quad dominant. And so from the very first moment I did this movement, I just allowed my hips to drift off the pad. From the very first rep, I never thought, I need to keep my hips on the pad, because I tried that when someone suggested, they're like, you're doing it wrong. And it felt like some kind of like shitty good morning. No, I want the knees to go forward. And if the knees are going to go forward, the hips have to go forward with them. And so those are, your hips are actually connected to your knees. I don't know if you know that. There's actually what is it called? A femur down there. Might be pronounced femur. I'm not sure actually. Another thing I like about these is that they actually force the lift to be more quad dominant as you get closer to failure. Often with a barbell back squat, or even, front squat, or even a Smith machine hack squat, as you get closer to failure, the instinct will be to shift the hips back and to use more posterior chain or even the erectors to get the bar up, especially if you have these long ass femurs. But for these, as you get closer to failure, actually you'll feel like you want to shift the knees forward. And so I actually think that this is a good thing, because there's no temptation to shift the hips back. I wouldn't say these are unpopular, but I will say that they are a little bit underappreciated, and a lot of people, even powerlifters, could benefit from including these in their programming. Finally, we have side bends. Now, these are something that are often viewed as dangerous for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. If you find these to be dangerous, you're probably just not very conditioned to moving side to side. There's no reason why moving side to side a little bit should be dangerous. It's only going to be dangerous if you've never really moved side to side, which is entirely possible if you're on a typical bodybuilding plan and you're sedentary the rest of the time. If you have, any type of athletic movement or wrestling or something where you're twisting and turning, these will seem like a complete joke. But I think for a lot of people, these are going to be a good conditioning movement. You can easily build up pretty heavy. And another area that I think people won't realize is being targeted are your spinal erectors. So they're not just responsible for erections. Phrasing.
Hey, phrasing!
Editor, cut that out. It's highly inappropriate. We can't have that kind of stuff on Jeffrey Verity Scoville's YouTube channel. Unacceptable. So the spinal erectors are not just responsible for erecting the spine, but they are also responsible for actually bringing the spine upright from a sideways position, right? So when you're in this position, you're actually stretching the spinal erectors, So these are actually a pretty decent spinal erector movement, as well as for the obliques. People often do them for the obliques. Yes, the obliques are working, but it's not just the oblique that performs this action. I found that when you go heavy as well, like 100 pounds or more, it also provides a pretty good stretch for like the upper back and the mid traps. And so it's just a pretty good all-around movement. I think it's good for injury prevention. Plus, I think that if you have hip imbalances or leg length imbalances, this is a really, really good sort of insurance policy, because you might actually find that one leg is moving a little bit differently, and so it'll work the adductors slightly, it'll work the glute medius slightly. You'll feel that entire hip area lighting up, especially if you do, sets of 20 or 25 or sets of 30. And so, yeah, I think there is value to be provided here. I don't think it's particularly dangerous. I think that if you feel like you're going to snap your shit up from doing this, you should probably do this. And actually, Louis Simmons used to promote these, may he rest in peace, and I think he was probably onto something here. I think that even for powerlifters, there's probably a lot of value to be gained. Actually, Ed Cohen also recommended doing like holds with the side bend, like with a barbell. So it's holding onto the barbell in a power rack, and not necessarily doing reps, but just doing it, holding it for time. And, that really does give you that ability to brace, which I think in particular, if you have muscle imbalances in the hips, in the lower back, etc., it's probably going to be a good idea to include. And there are, of course, other movements that you can do to work that similar movement pattern, that similar functionality, those areas, in the obliques and the side. You could do side planks with your feet up on a bench and then, dip your hips that way. I used to do that as a runner, super high reps, 70, 80, 90, 100 reps at a time, really burning out that sort of hip and entire side area. You could do a powerlift press, so where the cable is coming from the side, and then you push out, stay braced, hold it, go back in, push out, stay braced, hold it. And so your torso isn't moving, it's only your hands and staying braced. You could do like a wood chopper, high to low to high. And it always struck me as a little bit hypocritical, where if you do a wood chop, a limb chopper or whatever it's called, people are like, yeah, right on, Instagrammable. And then you do this with a dumbbell and people just lose their shit. Anyway, for more excellent exercise variations, you can check out my first book, Sweat. It has about a dozen or 15 or so exercises per movement pattern, pictures, descriptions, ratings on how good it is compared to other movements. And so that might be useful for you, especially if you're more on the beginner side. If you're an intermediate or if you're more advanced, I would check out Resurrecting Your Gains, which is sort of tailor-made to help you get over your lifting plateaus. Not for beginners, because if you're a beginner, you shouldn't be hitting plateaus anyway, but you could still buy it because eventually you will. So let me know if you do these in your program. And finally, I want to shout out Bald-Omni-Man. He actually had a very, very similar video that he posted a couple days ago on his 5 unpopular exercises. And so I had to give a shout out. It's not like I need an excuse to mention his content. It's fantastic. So check that out. I will link it in the description below. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.